and welcome to the Haddonfield United Methodist Church Weekly Sermon Podcast. For more information about us or anything you hear in this episode, be sure to visit haddonfieldumc.org. We hope that this and every episode can help sustain you on the journey as together we seek to put our faith into action.
Hi friends, welcome to our sermon podcast. I'm Chris Heckert and glad to be with you. We are right in the middle of a new sermon series called Building Bridges.
In an era of division and divisiveness, where the spaces between us seem to be growing wider by polarization and fear-mongering, Jesus calls us to build bridges and not widen the gap. In his teaching to love our enemies, to welcome the stranger, and to care for the suffering, Jesus makes us bridge builders, healers, and repairers of the breach. Join us in October as together we are building bridges to God's preferred future.
The sermon text this week is Mark 10, verses 46 to 52. They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. La canasta. Canasta. I knew the word. It was familiar. And I thought it had something to do with a dinner table, la canasta. I was in Western Panama. I was working for the mission agency of the United Methodist Church, and I had gone there to photograph and document the work of United Methodists in this region. And particularly, I had flown from Panama City up into this very rural, remote part of Western Panama to visit the Nobe Bugle indigenous tribe. The Methodist Church in Panama had had a clinic and a school and done other work to support this indigenous people. And there was a reservation where they lived that was an autonomous region of Panama. And I was going to go and take pictures of the village and the people who lived there. But as we got closer, I heard my guides speaking in Spanish to one another. And this strange word kept coming up, la canasta. La canasta. And I couldn't remember exactly what it meant, but I didn't know why they were saying it. And so we walked down a trail, and I had all my camera equipment with me, a bag on this side, and a camera with a big lens on this side. We got down to the river, and there was no bridge. And I heard them say, "¿Dónde está la canasta?" Where is the basket? There was a man, a young guy, on the other side of the raging river. It was a very fast, wide river, and on the other side there was a guy that was just walking in the brush. And I remember they cried out to him and they said, "La canasta." And I realized that there was a metal cord that went from one tree to the other, and hanging from it was a big metal basket. Think like a bucket on a cherry picker that your electrician or cable company might have, but it was hanging in suspension. And so what they told me was that a year before, an UMCOR team, a United Methodist volunteer team, had built a rope suspension bridge to help people cross over this river to get to the medical clinic, and kids could go to school and people could go to work. But like so often it would, in the spring, there were storms and the river raged and rose, and it wiped out that rope suspension bridge. And so, not having the resources to build a new bridge, they acquired a cable, and somewhere they got a metal basket, and only people who could pull themselves across were able to cross the river. And so this young man brought me the metal basket. He pulled himself across. I jumped in, had no idea what I was doing or who this guy was or where I was going. We got in the basket and we began to pull ourselves across until we got to the middle of the river, and the full weight of my big self and my cameras and this young man pulled down, and we were just dangling above the river. And I think he realized in that moment how much weight I added, and we had to try really hard to get the rest of the way over the river. And it was so much work that I actually tore my rotator cuff in my right shoulder. I wouldn't know it till I got back to the United States. But for about a year, I could not lift my arm above this area. It was so hard to get across the river. And what I realized in that experience is we cross bridges all the time in this country, drive across big ones and little ones, and concrete ones, metal bridges. We take them for granted, but without bridges, rivers can be big divides and chasms that isolate people. And for this indigenous tribe, without a bridge across the San Felix River where they lived, kids couldn't go to school. People couldn't get medical care. Others couldn't find work or get food or get help. And the elderly folks living in that reservation could not cross in a basket. Children could not pull themselves across in a basket. They needed a bridge, but the bridge had been wiped out, and they were isolated. Well, we live in a world today with raging rivers all over the place. And it seems like bridges have been wiped out. I'm not talking about physical rivers of water, but rivers that divide us and isolate us, rivers of division and partisanship, of conflict, of war, of fear-mongering, of divisiveness, a lack of cooperation, rivers that have isolated families and individuals and nations and are creating separation. And the bridges that once connected us, the bridges of bipartisanship, the bridges of community, the bridges of ecumenical work and relationships between denominations and churches and faiths, the bridges of friendship. In many ways, they have been wiped out, and the raging rivers of fear, injustice, disparity, and conflict have isolated so many people. We need more bridges, but how will we ever build them? Jesus shows us a way. In the story that I read for you here, Jesus and his disciples are passing through Jericho. Now, Jericho is ground zero for God's promise to the Israelites. If you know the Torah, Moses came and could see Jericho, could see the promised land. They had journeyed from Egypt all throughout the wilderness, and finally they get to the place where they are promised to have an eternal home. And Moses says, I cannot cross the river, but I have brought you as far as I can. And then Joshua goes, and we know the song, Joshua, what? Fought the battle of Jericho. And there, after an intense battle, the Israelites settle in, and it becomes their home. The nation of Israel. Well, generations later, Jericho is a reminder of who they used to be and their former glory, because now the Hebrew people of Jesus' day were living under Roman occupation. Many times the city of Jericho had been wiped out, and it was a shell of its former self. And so Jesus and his disciples are walking through this reminder that God had promised them an eternal home where they would prosper. And Jesus is actually leaving Jericho, and it says that a young man cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." What's significant about that phrase? Jesus, Son of David, a reminder that Jesus is considered by some the heir to the throne of David, the one who is to restore the people to God's promise so that they can thrive and prosper. And so he's crying out, "Jesus, save me, save us, have mercy." Now, the people in Jesus' camp, it says that many people tried to silence the man. You see, important people can't be bothered by the sick or the disabled. Holy people should not be interrupted by sinners. And by the way, we know from other gospels that when people were blind, they were considered either they were sinners or their parents must have been sinners. You see, and the priests of the day, the high priests, they were high and mighty, and they surely couldn't be bothered with the cries of sinners or the needy. So therefore, this Messiah surely couldn't be waylaid by a blind beggar. But Jesus interrupts our regular programming to stop and listen. He flips the script. Jesus says, "Wait, I want to see him. I want to hear what he has to say." And so they bring the young man to Jesus, and he says, "What is it that you desire of me?" And the man says, "That I may see. That I may see." He wants to be healed. He wants to be restored to functionality, to no longer be isolated, not only by blindness, but also being treated like an outcast animal cut off from society because surely he has done something wrong. Jesus tells Bartimaeus, he says, "Your faith has made you well." What we see in this story is that Jesus turns things kind of upside down. That so often in the Gospels, right, we are reminded that people like Bartimaeus are treated as sinners and they are outcast. And they want to be healed, not just for the physical healing, but also the healing in community. And while people around Jesus constantly want to protect him, like we protect our leaders and rulers and celebrities, Jesus calls us to live differently. The religion of Jesus is different than the religion about Jesus. I've shared before that Howard Thurman, great theologian and teacher and mystic of the 20th century, said that there are two Christianities, the religion of Jesus and the religion about Jesus. The religion that Jesus taught and showed us, and some sort of religion that has put Jesus on a pedestal but does not necessarily listen to the words or the teachings of Jesus. The religion of Jesus calls us to stop and listen. Number one, Jesus stops. Even though he had places to go, he was on his way to Jerusalem. He is unbusied because people are his primary priority. Jesus is always concerned with the needs and the hurts of the people, while his assistants and disciples and managers all think his priority is their agenda. Jesus calls us to lay down our agenda and make people our priority. Stop. Number two, one of the hardest things to do today is to listen, to allow people to voice their needs and their prayers and their hopes. I listen a bit in my life. I'm called to listen. I'm trained to listen. It's part of my job. And listening is generally hard when what people say go against my thoughts, beliefs, ideals, or when it doesn't make sense. But so often today in the world, we refuse to listen or stop listening because we don't want to hear something that jars us or triggers us or offends us or annoys us. But Jesus allows this young man to voice his deepest need. Maybe other people had been hearing him cry or complain about his situation for his whole life, but Jesus says, "Young man, what is it that you desire from me?" And he says, "That I may see." Stop and listen. And what we see is that God moves in the spaces in between. If I were to retell the story, I may say that Jesus met a young man. He was blind. He asked Jesus to heal him, and Jesus healed him, and he got up. But Jesus does not heal him in this story. Jesus says, "Your faith has made you whole or healed." When we listen and we spend time with people who suffer and hurt, God moves in their own story and does something amazing. I'm reminded by how Jesus slows down when the people around him want him to keep going. It reminds me of a book that came out in 1992 by Eugene Peterson called The Contemplative Pastor. A good friend of mine gave me a copy many years ago. And in that book, there's a chapter called The Unbusy Pastor. And I remember when I first read it, it talks about slowing down and don't always be in a hurry and be approachable. And I thought, well, I can't get anything done if I try and be unbusy because I have stuff to do. But Eugene Peterson, he levels with the reader. He says that busyness is often a symptom of vanity and laziness. What? Busy people they're active. They're getting stuff done, right? You're busy because you're not lazy. You're working. But Peterson says that when we are busy, we move with a sense that we are important and more important than the needs of others. And the laziness comes from not wanting to spend the effort or the attention on the things that matter the most. Peterson says that the busy pastor must focus on soul care. The unbusy pastor cultivates the ability to listen to people in a way that demonstrates that they are heard with absolute seriousness, treating them with dignity and importance. Isn't that what Jesus does here? He treats this young, blind Bartimaeus with dignity and importance. Now, while Peterson calls it the unbusy pastor, I would expand it to all of us. We are called to be unbusy followers of Jesus, who himself unbusied himself enough to treat everyone with dignity and importance. You know, sometimes when I read texts like this, I think, I wonder what came before this. I wonder what the context is in this passage. So I backed up in Mark 10, and right before this episode, there is this question of Jesus' disciples asking him, "Hey, when you get to your kingdom, can you make one of us sit on your right hand and one of us sit on your left hand?" Because they think he's going to be king and they want to be Secretary of State and Secretary of the Treasury. And Jesus says, you really don't know what you're asking. He says, you know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. Jesus says, it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be the slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus did not come to be served. He didn't come to be escorted by Secret Service. Jesus didn't come to ride in a limo with bulletproof glass. Jesus did not come to sit on a throne. Jesus came to get down and to look at children in the eye. And Jesus looks at Bartimaeus and frees him by listening and giving him his own voice. Jesus teaches us servant leadership through humility. So in a world in which I'm so sick of people on this side, and I really don't want to be around people like that, and I don't want to be exposed to this, Jesus teaches us if we want to be the greatest, we must serve, which means we have to shift the paradigm, that we listen, we slow down, and to build bridges means to build relationships. You see, in Jesus' day, the high priest was the top religious figure, high and mighty, feared and revered, too busy, preoccupied, and important. But Jesus is not too busy. Not too busy to hear the cry of those who suffer, to hear your needs and mine, those who long to be healed. And so hear this. My dear fellow Jesus followers, let us hear the cries of those who suffer. Let us stop from our busied, important, hurried lives and listen. Where there is no bridge, crossing the river is daunting. It's limited and it's risky. And when there isn't a bridge from one side of the chasm to the next, when you try and go over, you might even throw your shoulder out that prevents you from reaching the cereal for a year at the grocery store. But relationships are bridges. When we build relationships across the rivers that divide us, of economics, of race, of theology, of religion, of difference, when we build relationships, we build bridges by investing them. And the more we invest in relationships, the more weight they can handle. You know, when I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and they're still there today, most of the roads around my parents' house have a sign that says weight limit 10 tons. You see, the roads within about 2 miles of my parents' house are not paved. They are tar and chipped. I don't know if you know what tar and chip is, but it's soft limestone chips that are spread out on very thick tar. It's done in the summer. You don't want to drive your car once that has been laid for a few days because it'll stick to your tires and to your car. But tar and chip is a very cheap and soft way of paving a road. It can't handle the same weight of a paved and fortified road. Now, 10 tons seems like a lot. You don't have a problem with your car or even pickup truck, but coal trucks, farm equipment, oil tankers, and other things can't go on those roads. And my parents lived near coal mines and farms and strip mines and other industrial areas. So those heavy trucks have to go the long way around because these tar and chipped roads cannot handle anything over 10 tons. You know, bridges are the same way. Bridges have weight limits. Smaller, more rural bridges can't handle big trucks like a major bridge can, like the Ben Franklin. Did you know that relationships are like bridges? The more we fortify them, the more weight they can handle. But when they aren't built up very much with efforts to care and listen, to trust, they give out easily. Think about it. Long-term relationships that you have that have endured time, conflict, and loss are usually the result of investments of time spent, of love shown, of listening, of hanging out, of caring. And so when those friendships are tested, they can endure the weight. But friendships that are built usually only through casual interaction or only fun experiences or surface sharing, those bridges, when there's a disagreement or conflict or loss, can easily fall apart. And today, what we are seeing is with our current global climate that has resulted in fear, partisanship, deep divisions, despair, anger, suspicions of others. It is as though we are living in a land with many raging rivers, with fewer and fewer bridges to cross. When do we cross the rivers of division and harm? When we try, it's not easy. We find ourselves pulling our entire weight in a metal basket. But Jesus' followers build bridges. Why? Because Jesus built bridges between God and the sick. Jesus built bridges between God and the poor, between God and the blind and the widow, the divorced woman, the adulterer, and the sinners. Jesus even built bridges between the outcasts and the Pharisees and their own communities, restoring people to relationship and self-worth. Friends, in a world of raging rivers, we are called to build bridges, to slow down, to listen to people across the divide. But here's the good news. I don't feel like I have the skills or the patience necessary, but I don't have to, because Jesus is the bridge. Jesus is ever ready to be present, to listen and to heal, and all I need to do is to prioritize another person's humanity by giving them dignity and worth. To prioritize relationships that invoke the presence of Jesus through unbusied time, acts of hospitality, of care, of mercy, and reconciliation. When we reach out to those we don't like when they are hurting, because Jesus did, Jesus shows up and makes healing possible. When we do this, we become bridges that lead people to greater hope in God. So it's not a harrowing act to cross the river of illness or loneliness, isolation, and fear. We build bridges by building relationships, slowing down, listening, and allowing people to name their own faith through which we can all find healing. May it be so, and may we be the church in a hurting world. Amen.
Thanks again for listening. For more information about us or anything you heard in this episode, be sure to visit haddonfieldumc.org. Through today's scripture and message, we pray that you find strength to go deeper into love of God and neighbor as we work together to be the church in a hurting world.